Let me take a moment and share with you and ask for everyone's feedback on a modeling of MicroStrategy's price that I did using a discounted cash flow model. By any standards, even by the most conservative ones, MicroStrategy is unbelievably mispriced. So the price targets that I get by using different assumptions are the following. If I use the Bitcoin power law price predictions, MicroStrategy's price today should be $1,005 per share. If I'm more conservative and I think that the power law is going to be flat after 2029, then MicroStrategy today should be 536. If I follow Saylor's assumptions that he shared in the Q3 earnings call, it should be 978. For today's price, which is currently at 395, the assumptions are so ridiculous that it's unbelievably bearish. I will share those assumptions of each of these models in a second. And then I tried to stretch the model as much as I could to come up with a true north, irresponsibly long price. And I come up with 2,336. So let's dig into the model. First, how did I tweak Damodaran's Bible of valuation to make it possible? So first, I try to follow the Bible as much as possible so that I don't put any of my biases into it, but I had to do a couple of tweaks, which I'll take you through. I use no buzzwords like Saylor Premium. That to me doesn't exist. It should be something that should be reflected in the cash flows, not something that I pulled out of my ass. The MNAV is not assumed. It is a consequence of the future cash flows and the expectations of future cash flows. The Bitcoin yield is modeled as a free cash flow. I'll explain how I did it in a second. I assume a Bitcoin yield percentage. And the beauty of it is that by assuming that, I then don't have to worry about what's the future share count gonna be. Because for current shareholders, they will receive this Bitcoin yield and that's all that matters. You'll see in a second in a model. I assume that all options will convert, and this is an assumption that not all will agree. And I do this valuation from the perspective of the Bitcoin maximalist. Saylor has said multiple times that if you're not a Bitcoin maximalist, there's no point of you owning MicroStrategy. You shouldn't be here. Now, if you do, and if you're valuing MicroStrategy from those lenses, you have to understand that the Bitcoin maximalist doesn't really care about the future price of Bitcoin reflected in MicroStrategy's price. Because if I'm a Bitcoiner and I have money today, I can buy Bitcoin and that Bitcoin is going to value throughout time. I don't need MicroStrategy for that. Now what I need MicroStrategy for is for the Bitcoin yield. Because the Bitcoin yield is the gift. It's like the earnings of MicroStrategy that I can't otherwise have by just owning Bitcoin. Okay? So in the valuation of future cash flows, I will see these two prices differently. The future price of Bitcoin for the current Bitcoin that are owned by MicroStrategy, I don't care about it. I just care about the Bitcoin yield and the future price that those yielded Bitcoins will have. Okay? Now let's play with the model. So when we do discounted cash flows, the first thing that we gotta do is what is the cost of capital gonna be? Okay? And I'm gonna share this, this file with everyone and all the assumptions are referenced in here. Okay? So the risk-free rate currently is 421, and that's the USA 10-year bond yield. The beta is the beta of MicroStrategy, which today is 306. The ERP that you can get from Damodar's webpage here is 385%. That gives me a cost of equity of 1599. Okay. Now I'm getting the current cost of debt from MicroStrategy, and I'm assuming that cost as being the interest rate divided by the debt. Okay. The increased number of shares from the conversions, I will consider that separately. Okay. So what I get is a cost of capital of 1541%. This is a very expensive cost of capital. And the reason for that is that Bitcoin has a very high beta. Okay, so this is also being conservative because if I'm discounting future cash flows with a higher discount of 1541%, I think I'm being conservative. Now this is the model. So what I did in this model is here you have all the assumptions. Okay, Here you have how they reflect in the future cash flows, okay? And this is the price target of that it outputs, okay? So let's start with explaining what all these assumptions are, okay? So this is the cost of equity, cost of debt, cost of capital, which I explained just a second ago. This is the current price of Bitcoin. This is actually the price at the close of markets on Friday. So I'm doing this on a Saturday, Friday, yesterday, so the 6th of December. This is when MicroStrategy closed. This is the price that Bitcoin had. This is the number of Bitcoin that MicroStrategy currently holds. This is the total number of shares, assuming that all the stock options, all the converted debt converts, okay? And I get it from the 8K. This is the current annual expense. Now, some people say, well, the interest expense doesn't really matter because that is paid by the cash flows of the software business. Right. But to value the software business, what I did was I took the price it had before Saylor started buying Bitcoin and I evolved it to today with a 5% year-on-year increase. Okay. Now remember, in 2020, Bitcoin had zero debt. And so they had zero interest payments, right? So you can't have both. If you're using the price that MicroStrategy had then, you'd need to discount from the cash flows what it is paying in interest, okay? Now, remember that I said that for a Bitcoiner, the evolution of the price of the current Bitcoin that MicroStrategy holds doesn't matter because I can get Bitcoin by buying Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin that I buy will also increase the same way that Saylor's Bitcoin will increase, okay? So what I'm counting is on my base assumption that that will be zero, okay? Now, some people may say, and rightly so, that for some buyers of MicroStrategy, they could value today the Bitcoin that they own with a little premium. And why? Because they cannot get Bitcoin otherwise and they cannot get the ETF otherwise. Some odd countries may be like that, so I could conceive that those people would value Bitcoin higher, but on average, they would be the minority, okay? Because pretty much on every country with, wealth, power, they will have an alternative to get it either through an ETF or by buying Bitcoin directly. Okay, so I could say that on average we could put in there like a 4%, a 5%, a 10% max, but that's it. Okay. Now I divide this model in 3 phases. Okay, and the phases end at the peak of the hype of Bitcoin, right? In the 4-year cycle. So we estimate that the end of 2025 will be a peak, like the end of a 4 years. Then from 26 to 29 will be another 4 years. So 29 will be another peak. And then 2030 to 2033 will be the other 4-year cycle. So I'm not starting the cycle when the, like as it typically does, when the Bitcoin award for miners changes. I'm ending it and starting it at the end of the hype. Okay. And Saylor has said that MicroStrategy will have a Bitcoin yield of 10% for the next 3 years, between 6 and 10% for the next 3 years. So this would be where you would put that Bitcoin yield. Now, terminal value growth. We have to assume after 2033, which is when I end my model, how will MicroStrategy grow from then onwards? Okay. An important rule is that you cannot have companies grow at a higher rate of the economy. Now, you saw that the risk-free rate is 4.21%. So that would be the max, right? Because if the economy is growing at 4.21%, if MicroStrategy grows above 4.21%, in infinity, it will become the economy. And that's a huge mistake on discounted cash flow models that I want to, by all means, avoid. So I'm being conservative and I'm putting a terminal value growth of 2%. Now the beta is 306, okay? And this is what I estimate the price of Bitcoin to be from 25 until 2033, okay? And this 5% here is the input for how much I think if Saylor had not bought any Bitcoin, what would be the value of the base software business? So before he bought Bitcoin, it was 1.5 billion. I'm expanding it 5% year on year. So today that business would be worth 1.8, right? Now, this 1.8 is the current value of the future cash flows of the software business, right? So I'm not going to touch on it. I'm not going to expand it. I'm not going to try to see, oh, but they are doing some clever things, so this can be a little more, a little less. It's irrelevant for the valuation, okay? Now, let's see what we have here. I will make this spreadsheet available to everyone. I'll share the link. And this spreadsheet is, I will put the link on Twitter, and I'll put the link on the description of this video on YouTube. And you can play with all the values of these orange cells. Okay, you can change it, and then you will see what is the predicted price of MicroStrategy in this cell here. Okay, now let me start with what my base assumption is, what I call the power law. Okay, so if I put my values in here, so what am I saying? I'm saying that from the perspective of a Bitcoiner, the price evolution of the current Bitcoin that MicroStrategy owns is irrelevant, because I can buy Bitcoin and I will have that same value. So it doesn't bring me any happiness to get those from MicroStrategy. Okay, what I value is what is the Bitcoin yield going to be. Now remember, Saylor in 2024 has passed 60% Bitcoin yield. Okay, so although the promise from MicroStrategy 2025 is between 6 and 10, I think it's very conservative. I think that there will still be a few months before the craziness of, the Trump adoption and other markets adoption and everyone getting crazy. So Saylor still has a lot of time to run in front of all those players, and at least a 20% we will have next year. And then I'm putting the next 2 years with the midpoint of the MicroStrategy promise, the next two phases with 8% year on year. Yeah. Then I will say that, so you can see here that the free cash flows of MicroStrategy, this is how much they will be growing, right? Until the end of 2023, okay? What I'm saying is, at the terminal value, those cash flows will only grow at 2%, okay? So I'm being really conservative. Okay, then this is the price that we get from Bitcoin until 2033. Now, this is the assumption from what I call base and power law until, sorry, this is wrong here. No, this is correct. Until 29, and after 29, the price of Bitcoin gets flat. Okay, so 405 until infinity. Okay. This gives me a price of 536. Okay, so now this is assuming that the Bitcoin power law, which I wanna show you here, this is the absolutely best statistical model for predicting Bitcoin price, and I'm assuming that this yellow line, which is the midpoint, is the price that Bitcoin will have, right? Up until a point that I'm assuming here that it will break, right? And as it breaks, it will be 405 forever. Okay. Now, if I use the power law price until 2029, I'm getting a target price of 1,005. Okay. Now let's talk about Saylor. Okay. Let me put the Saylor assumptions in here, and let me explain to you what they mean. So Michael Saylor, in the Q3 call, if you heard it attentively, he said that he talked about, he said at some point, he said, I'm going to show you a slide about it, but at some point he said, look, let me weigh in on the MNAV thing and how to value MicroStrategy. And that's where he said MicroStrategy was a growth company, and then he started talking about 30 multiples and 50 multiples and 100 multiples. And then he said, and based on this is how much the market price, the market cap of MicroStrategy should be. Okay, what are his assumptions that he revealed? Okay, his assumptions are a 10% Bitcoin yield forever. Okay, so I have it here. He didn't say anything about terminal growth. Okay, so I'm putting 2% as well. And Saylor has the assumption that for the next 21 years, Bitcoin will grow at 29% year on year. Okay. Now he says that in the beginning it will be more and at the end will be less. But to be conservative, I'm putting 29% from 25 until 2033. Okay. So based on the Saylor assumptions, it should be 978. Okay. Let me see now how, and see this will give us an MNAV of 649 and a market cap of 264 billion for MicroStrategy. Now let me show you on the PowerPoint what Saylor said. So he said in this Q3 call, now I'm going to weigh into the big premium debate. And then he starts talking about the premiums and so on. And after a lot of mental calculations, he ends with saying, look, MicroStrategy should be something between 80 and 100 billion operation plus the current reserves, okay? Or on a different model, between 108 and 180 billion plus the reserves. Okay, now remember these calculations that he shared was when Bitcoin was at 67. Okay, now if I run this math, okay, and I have it here, at the time this meant that MicroStrategy from his perspective should be between 121 and 141 market cap, or 149 and 221 market cap. Okay, now based on my model, it would be 264 market cap. But remember, at the time, MicroStrategy was at 67. Now it is sorry, Bitcoin was at 67. Now it is at 100. Okay. Now I want to finish with the bear case. And what are the assumptions that lead us to the price that we have today? So everyone can feel comfortable, at least I do, and I would like you to tell me where I'm wrong, that the price of today is extremely undervalued. Okay, so the price of today assumes that Saylor will have pretty sad Bitcoin yields. Okay, so he's gonna move from 60% this year to 8% next year, and then 7, and then 6. Okay, and that the price of Bitcoin will break the power law, which it never did. And after 2029, it will be 405 forever. Okay, that's the only way that justifies the 393 that we have today. And see that I'm not doing anything crazy like people saying at the end of 2025, Bitcoin will be worth like 500,000 and all that stuff. None of that, right? So the power law is pretty conservative on what it is concerned, right? Now, let me tell you what is, oh, and by the way, if you want to see what the equation of the power law is, it's this. So Giovanni has it shared on, well, pretty much everywhere, right? And what I did was I did the calculations based on his formula, which is here, okay, to get exactly the predicted Bitcoin price by the midpoint of his algorithm. So now, what about the mega bulls? Just so we end on a happy note. So what I did was let's consider that the people that today cannot buy Bitcoin, they will value the current holdings of Bitcoin of MicroStrategy at a premium of 10%, right? So they would be able to pay today 110 for the price of Bitcoin that is currently 100, okay? Because they cannot get Bitcoin otherwise, yeah? Then Saylor will have another spectacular year next year, so 50%. Then he will come down because, come on, other people will pick it up and he won't be able to do these spectacular years again. Yeah. The terminal growth will be higher, so it will be at the same pace as the economy. Okay, so 421% forever. It cannot be above 421 because if you put the growth above 421, it means that in infinity, MicroStrategy will be the economy of the world. And that, as you can see, is nonsense. Yeah. And then we follow the power law until 2033. Okay, so Bitcoin will hit 1 million by 2033. The price of MicroStrategy today should be 2,336. Okay. Now back to the PowerPoint, just for a final note of what I want to give back to the community, but what I'm asking of you to help me make this model good for me and good for everybody, because I'll keep sharing it. What feedback do I need? What am I doing wrong, right? what different approach should I take? Not approach from a discounted cash flow, but anything that I should change in the approach that I took. And what did I miss, right? What I will be thinking of after gathering everyone's feedback is how can I perfect the calculation of the beta, right? Professor Damodaran has, a more sophisticated method than just getting it from Yahoo Finance. I'll do that. It's laborious, but I'll do that and share back. Then run a Monte Carlo simulation, which is something similar to what you see on the right, which is for each input, instead of giving it one number, we give it a distribution. So I don't know, the beta, instead of saying it's 3.06, it's at some point between 2.5 and 3.5 with a uniform distribution. That kind of stuff. And doing it for all the inputs and then seeing what the output is. Yeah. And the output will then be also probabilistic, and we'll be able to say, okay, based on all this, there's an 80% probability that the fair value of MicroStrategy is between A and B. Okay. And finally, I will try to use the power law distribution and not just the midpoints, right? That may have very complex implications, because at some point, the price of the power law will mean that the convertible bonds will not convert. And that will have further consequences in the model, right? So this will be like the last step, like a final tweak to make it really, bulletproof. And I'll step by step, I'll be sharing this with every one of you if you guys see the interest in it. So, okay, again, unbelievably mispriced based on my academic evaluation of it. And I hope, it helps everyone feel a little easier. This is not financial advice, of course, but I'm going to share this Google Sheet with everyone so that you can play with your own assumptions and you come up with your own target. Okay, thank you. Please share all the feedback that you can. Thank you very much.